thank you. Appreciate being here, and I know that it has been a information-packed few days for you. So we're going to turn and talk about something a little different, something that probably most of you in your organizations don't have to deal with, and that is disaster relief logistics. So when I mention that I work in disaster relief, I kind of get a couple of different returns whenever I say that. The first is, oh yeah, we volunteer with organization X. And the second is, how can I ship for FEMA? So we're going to focus really on the first item we have there today, which is how can your organizations utilize the assets and skills at your fingertips to help further philanthropic efforts to help when a disaster occurs. So I'd like you to help me welcome Jason Schernock. And Jason, if you just give us a quick introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about Medshare.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Good morning. My name is Jason Schernock. I serve as the Director of Programs and Partnerships for an international aid organization called Medshare. We're headquartered here in Atlanta. We have facilities outside of Oakland and up in Secaucus, New Jersey as well. And essentially, in short, our mission is to improve the quality of life for people, communities, and the planet. And how we do that is we procure donations of high quality, unused, unexpired medical supplies and biomedical equipment in the US, and we redistribute those items to hospitals and clinics in developing countries. So my role, in my position, I'm responsible for procuring $20 to $30 million of donated medical products on an annual basis, and I oversee our program development, including our disaster relief initiative.
Great, so you're dealing with the reverse logistics side of things, and you have to manage all of those inbounds, and you're also dealing with processing that and getting it back out to the people who really need it during disaster.
Yes, and we bring items in from across the United States. So we have our hubs, in the coast in the southeast and the Pacific Northwest, but we get donations from hospitals, manufacturers, distributors across the entire United States, and we have shipped to over 103 countries around the world.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive, laydown of logistics.
Thank you.
So, some of this is why is this important? Why should you care about this? So the statistics that are often cited is that from a humanitarian relief perspective, 80% of the funds utilized for humanitarian relief go towards logistics activities. And that's everything from packaging all the way and procurement activities all the way through shipment and last mile activities. And it's been pretty obvious that over the past 2.5 years, that there's been a real need for humanitarian and disaster relief logistics in general. I mean, already in 2019, we've had 2 disasters that have cost the U.S. over $1 billion apiece. And I don't know if there are any of you here from the Midwest, Nebraska. I don't know if Werner's in the house. The impact to the communities in Nebraska has been phenomenally tragic. And the same with the Southeast and the tornadoes that went through in early March, where we had deaths affiliated with it. And then we can go back to 2017 with and Harvey, Irma, Maria, and the wildfires. And I know you guys are still working on items in Puerto Rico. I know my organization is still working on that. But as we go through all of that, medical plays a pretty critical role. And so maybe you want to touch on some of the activities that you guys are working on now or have worked on, and the role that the medical supplies plays.
Sure. With disaster relief, generally, organizations like Medshare, the first thing you have to do is know your place. You have to know your place in the order and the sequence of what's important. So since 2010, we've responded to maybe a dozen different natural and man-made disasters around the world. The biggest response we've ever participated in was the 2014-15 Ebola outbreak in West Africa. So this was 3 countries in Western Africa: Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea. We ended up shipping probably 40 ocean containers, 40-foot ocean containers over a 6-month period, pretty much filled with personal protective apparel to help frontline health workers in hospitals on the ground treating patients. But before you can do any of that, you have to understand the type of event you're dealing with and what your role in that response is. So if it's an earthquake, if it's any kind of tsunami or cyclone like we just had in Southern Africa, the first 24 to 72 hours is search and rescue, followed by essential life-saving items, so water, food, hygiene supplies, trauma care, and then you get to medical. So you can't just ship, and it's a huge mistake. We have that in our own country as well. There's a disaster on the ground. People send everything they have in their bedroom closet. They just want to help. And what happens is those things pile up. This happened in Houston. It happened in Florida after Irma. Happened in the Carolinas after Hurricane Michael. And this stuff just piles up. No one knows what to do with it. No one has the infrastructure to deal with it. So you got to know where you fit into that picture.
It's too much of a good thing.
It is. It is. And so these Medshare, as an organization that wants to be responsible in responding to natural disasters, you have to understand what's happening on the ground, and you have to understand who's able to receive your goods and how they're able to manage it so you don't cause more of a problem. The first rule of international aid is do no harm, and that's what we're really focused on.
So, you've talked about every link along the logistics, along the supply chain there, right? And so you're dealing with a lot of different touch points. Obviously, there are going to be some challenges when you're dealing with that. And you were telling me a story about your Nepal earthquake response that I think would be illustrative to some of the challenges that people who are operating commercial supply chains, they don't have to deal with the kind of stuff you guys do.
Sure. Okay. So I understand we're at a conference here to talk about technology in the freight industry. And I think Medshare, we're living in the dark ages sometimes when it comes to available information and technology. So I think the hardest response we've ever participated in was a 2015 earthquake in Nepal. Now, this is a small, highly impoverished, landlocked country. There's no ocean port access. The airport was damaged. And yet we had been active in supporting hospitals there over the years. So we wanted to do something. So we had to figure out, A, could we fly stuff in? And if not, how could we get it via ocean cargo there? Essentially what we ended up doing was we shipped through a port in India. So you've got to go through one country's customs process, put it on a flatbed, take the container up through a border crossing to another country. There was civil strife in the main border crossing, so we had to take it 24 hours to the western stretches of Nepal up through a secondary border crossing. Once you get through there and clear customs, you had to break that truck into two smaller trucks because the roads were just impassable for like a 53-foot trailer. And so that went to the last viable city. It was then broken into jeeps. The jeeps went as far as they could go. Once you got into the mountainous regions of Nepal, they unloaded the jeeps, strapped those things to their back, and just walked up to the clinic where they were. And all this was communicated to us via WhatsApp.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah. So low tech, high tech, right?
Yes. Yes. So there's not a lot of insight. You just have to trust your partners on the ground.
Yeah. So, you talked about like everything that possibly could have gone wrong, just like the challenges you had to deal with there. Do you have any successes where things just seem to magically flow?
Oh, no.
That's fair.
No, of course not. But sometimes things go smoother than others. In what we do, it's all about the partnership. And so sometimes we have excellent partners that are highly organized and coordinated, and sometimes not. And,
right.
And especially in a disaster setting, everyone is scrambling to figure out what's needed and where it's needed. So we just recently pretty much wrapped up a response to Cyclone Beira. So Cyclone Beira, a huge cyclone, hit southern Africa.
Mozambique, Malawi.
Malawi basically destroyed the port city of Beira, which was a major ocean port for that country and that region of the world. So that port was essentially non-functional for a while, and the government there had to figure out how they were going to bring aid in. There's also a formal system. If a country wants help from the international community, they can go through this and actually make a formal appeal for that assistance. So you want to make sure that's happened as well. And then once that's put in place, there are formal channels that spring up, but what Medshare does, because we have such an extensive international network, we just reach out directly to people on the ground that we worked with. And we just, in plain language, just say, what's the problem? What do you need? How is it being organized? And can aid get into the country? And we just sort of take it from there.
So on that response, I know we worked with you guys on some of those shipments. How is that response going? How much have you shipped? How much, how long will that continue?
Ultimately, we sent, I think, 8 40-foot equivalent ocean containers worth of material. We did some air shipping as well with our friends at Airlink out in New York City. So they put together some charter flights. We were able to fly aid directly into Maputo in the country, and it was sort of distributed from there. But the long term for us is rebuilding, helping a country rebuild. So I think ultimately it's probably 8 to 10 40-foot equivalents worth of material. And we estimate that we can serve about 12,500 people with every container that we ship. And so that was sort of what we were aiming for. And that's a pretty typical response for us, maybe 10 shipments over a 2 to 3 month period. Other events like Ebola or Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, those are the exceptions where the need is so great, we're just in it for the long haul.
Yeah, let's talk about Hurricane Maria for a minute. We had congestion at the port in San Juan, caused partially by the issue you mentioned earlier with too much of a good thing and people wanting to help, caused somewhat by internal structures not sensing and responding appropriately. What was some of the things that you saw in Puerto Rico or USVI that would be interesting to hear about?
Well, I think congestion at the port is a very polite way to share what happened.
A bit of an understatement.
In Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. So I think it's important for people to understand that while it's a part of the United States, Puerto Rico has a lot of challenges that don't exist in other territories and regions of the U.S. Challenge with infrastructure, challenge with service delivery on a good day, and in particular, their utility network. They essentially had a complete and total blackout on the island for months. For months and months. We lost power for 3 days in Atlanta and we freaked out. So I can't even imagine what you would do in that situation. But there was a huge need. So it's not to say that the response wasn't appropriate. But they had basically one ocean port. And at one point, I believe there were 1,000 containers just sitting there in the terminal.
At least,
which means that food is spoiling, medicine is going bad. They might not have temperature control in the containers. There's a shortage of fuel on the island, so there was no way to truck those containers, even if they got through the system. So we had to kind of temper our enthusiasm, right? Because you don't want to add to that right away. Plus, the US government had a huge response. So FEMA's always going to have priority over a small NGO. We started looking for some more creative ways to get aid into the island. And one of the things that we found was because of its proximity to the US mainland, there are quite a lot of individuals with private aircraft that were willing to pick up supplies and fly them indirectly to the communities that were affected. And there, Puerto Rico actually has a fairly mountainous, dense region that's hard to get trucks into. And so these small aircraft became kind of a lifeline. So we started loading up supplies into small private planes. Some corporate jets got involved, started delivering drugs, medication, medical products, and water.
Right.
Water was a huge need on the island as well.
No power, you can't, your public water systems don't work.
Everything.
Right?
So I would say the most interesting experience we had was a lot of people just came to us at the last minute, right? We got this jet, we're loading it up. Can Medshare contribute some medical supplies? Well, I think a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, we got a call from someone in Tyler Perry's company. Right? Tyler Perry's film studios here in Atlanta, and he was sending his private plane, and Anderson Cooper was going to be on the plane, and did Medshare want to put their boxes in? Who are we to say no to Tyler Perry? So of course. So Friday afternoon.
Medea would be mad. Big
she
mama.
would. Yeah. She would. And there we were in the warehouse, just stacking pallets. And they showed up at 6 o'clock and picked it up, and next thing we knew, the next day it was landing in Puerto Rico and being distributed. So there was a lot of personal efforts that were very inspiring. I mean, people really took it very personally, what was happening.
Yeah.
And, we were fortunate to be included in a lot of those.
Yeah, you mentioned something as part of that where you said, FEMA is always going to have priority over a very small nonprofit. FEMA is probably always going to have priority over everybody in this room as well, right? Because there's the idea that the relief aid needs to get there first,
Sure.
right? Is that really always the case? Are we better off restarting the commercial supply chains, enabling the agencies that are already operating on the ground in the communities, or sending big bulk relief? And there's a lot of study being done on this right now. If you're interested, there's a National Academies study that's happening about this right now. The report will be out later this fall, September, October timeframe. But there's a lot of interest in this because who's the best provider, right? Who's the best person to eat? Why would you eat at an MRE when Burger King is open, right? And Burger King's one of the great success stories from Hurricane Maria. So you said it earlier, we're at a Freight Tech conference. How could technology help solve some of these challenges that you guys deal with, and as partners, we feel your pain as well.
I think there's a misunderstanding that nonprofit organizations don't pay for things, which is not the case at all. Outside of salaries, freight is our largest line item in our budget every year. We're a relatively mid-sized nonprofit organization. We set aside about $500,000 for ocean freight and associated costs on an annual basis. But there's organizations that spend 5 to 10 times that amount on what they're shipping out. In the world, there has not been a lot of change to humanitarian logistics, especially at the start point with the United States. Globally, there's been some activity on the ground. So after disaster strikes, the World Food Program organizes what's called the logistics cluster, which is just a fancy way of saying people actually meeting together and coordinating their activities on the ground, and then that information is distributed online.
But it's still low tech.
It's still low tech.
Yeah.
It's just a very updated webpage.
Right.
So you can get good real-time information from that, especially on in-country transportation routes and networks. That's kind of their focus.
Right.
But we're always looking for assistance in ways to be more efficient, ways to have more transparency, from start to end.
That visibility that Brad Jacobs talked about yesterday.
Yeah, basically Medshare takes responsibility for each leg of the trip, from our facility to the site and wherever it's going, because no one else is offering to do that.
Sure.
So we kind of piece together the movement through different companies. Some we have some good technology related to it, others not. But no one is really offering to make that system smoother for us. And even those companies that have a humanitarian logistics focus, which a lot of companies do, so whether it's Kuehne+Nagel or UPS, there's just pieces of it. And I do want to give a shout out to UPS. They're just a huge supporter. They have a team of experts in place, so they're probably better than anyone at doing this. But in a lot of cases, it's just up to the organization to manage it from start to finish.
Yeah, and so being able to have a single pane of glass where you could see, hey, there's my load. It's left my dock. It's made it to the airport. It's made it. That level of visibility is going to be something that's important to you.
Yeah, I would say it this way. The innovations that seem to get presented to us are technologies that try to make more efficient or optimize the system that's in place. But what people aren't really coming to us with is a better way to design the system. And so, yes, you can have more transparency, but that doesn't change what people are doing around international rules of accountability, of sort of the total end-to-end visibility into the shipment. I mean, what I found is that much of the freight logistics industry is structured to avoid legal accountability and financial responsibility.
Okay.
And so that's on us. And that's why we watch our freight so carefully.
Sure.
And it would be excellent to have some more tools that sort of put this together more comprehensively.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the thought just occurred to me, if a load gets lost in the commercial space, well, there's insurance and somebody's going to pick up the bill and, on that. If a load gets lost in one of your shipments, people are going to die.
Yes.
I mean, it's a terrible way to say it, but it just shows the impact of the work that you're doing and the importance of good visibility of your activities.
Yes, and we don't have customers in the traditional sense.
Right.
We have health ministries and government organizations and hospitals in developing countries and NGOs. So we have partners, and everyone has some financial skin in the game, but it's not like a real customer in a traditional sense.
Yeah, so the accountabilities that you talked about are a little different in the humanitarian world.
They are.
Yeah, so you also mentioned, your biggest spend outside of personnel is on your freight cost. If you had a way to know, what you really should be paying versus what you actually end up paying, and given the fact that humanitarian response and disaster response especially happens very rapidly, right? It's not like you can plan your shipments for months ahead of time. You kind of know what you're going to need. You don't always know where you're going to need it or where it's going to end up. But I know, talk a little bit about kind of things, challenges, pain points for you on that shipment side.
Well, in a disaster relief setting, yes, you're not necessarily going to know what you need or where it needs to go. But for the ongoing program work we do, we plan that out months in advance. So we do have visibility as to where it's going, what those shipping routes are going to look like, the port of entry. Pain points that we encounter is there's really not a lot of people operating in the humanitarian logistics space. I mean, there's a small set of companies that have specialized in it, so there's not a ton of competition. Now, some of those companies do an excellent job, and we're very happy with the services we get, but I think they're also aware that, there's not a lot of innovation that comes out of it as a result. So certainly we're not brought or introduced to a lot of new technologies that would sort of help us improve visibility from end to end. It's very, very challenging because we ship to so many countries around the world. Every single country has their own set of customs policies, requirements, rules, and regulations. And humanitarian aid is treated differently than commercial cargo.
Right.
So we just create basically our own internal database, but that information is extremely valuable. Yeah. So that's a huge pain point, just collecting that and staying updated.
Through manual processes.
Absolutely. Just being updated on kind of the rules and regulations of how to do this around the world. You really do have to respect that country by country, otherwise your cargo will just get stuck in the port.
Sure, so there's a challenge to those of you in the audience. The nonprofit community is underserved when it comes to activities like this. I want to switch gears for just a second. We've talked a lot about things that you need. What value do you think that nonprofit and humanitarian organizations can provide back to the business community? Why should they care?
Well, in my experience, nonprofits all need some level of assistance, and most, especially larger companies, get approached all the time by large, small, and mom and pop nonprofit organizations. We found the companies we partner with, they value the partnership because it's a clear sense of their responsibility and how they're going to respond to these events around the world. So if a disaster strikes in Nebraska, everyone that has trucks that go to Nebraska will be approached. And companies are filled with people, and people want to do responsible things, and they want to help. And so they get kind of thrown into a difficult situation if they're being asked by 100 different groups to support them. But if they have a partnership, those organizations can actually coordinate a lot of those activities for them.
Right.
So a lot of companies that partner with Medshare will defer those smaller kind of those requests that come in out of nowhere to the nonprofit, and they will actually take a lot of that burden off the company, and they can just focus on what their core business is.
Sure.
And nonprofits can sort of help coordinate and bring to them what are the legitimate responses you need to be a part of. So I think that's one way.
Right.
Of course, there is great value in a lot of companies in just partnering in the social space and civic space. It's something that a lot of stakeholders care about, it's something that a lot of investors care about, and ultimately it's something a lot of people just feel the need to do for the communities that they're a part of.
Yeah, people want to help, they just don't always know how to get involved. And I'll put out a quick pitch for American Logistics Aid Network. We're here to help you find the organizations like Medshare that align with your corporate values, that align with your desire to do good. And we focus specifically on the logistics activities, whether it's transportation, warehousing, or material handling equipment. Anything that you want to do where you want to apply your assets and resources, we can help you find a way to do it. So just with the 45 seconds or so we have left, parting shots. What's hot in Jason's mind today?
Well, first I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Medshare. We are an Atlanta-based organization. We'd love to connect with your company, understand more about what resources are available out there. And all I want to do is offer my thanks to Alan as well. Organizations like Alan, Airlink, UPS, they really kind of form the backbone of humanitarian response and coordinating the freight and logistics industry to work with groups like us. So thank you.
That's wonderful. And then just, in 5 seconds or less, I'll encourage each of you as you're looking towards hurricane season, which starts in 28 days or so, if there are ways that you need help preparing for your business continuity efforts, or you're thinking about how you can apply your philanthropic goodwill, give us a call. Please help me thank Jason.